Okay, class, it is so great to be with you. This is chapter one. I'm doing a little bit of a video lecture since I can't be with you this evening due to the charity event I need to be at. So I'm broadcasting from the comforts of my own home. So I'm going to do a quick screen share. We're going to dive into the PowerPoint presentation and we're going to get this all knocked out. So if you'll bear with me just for 1 second. I'll do a quick share. Okay, everything seems to be functioning correctly. So our devotion for tonight is Luke chapter 14, verse 28. Suppose one of you wants to build a tower. Won't you first sit down and estimate the cost to see if you have enough money to complete it? And this is a powerful scripture that is not just spiritual, but it's also physical in our lives, because we know that the spiritual affects the physical as well. And so when we make plans or we set out to do something where we feel like we're led to go in a certain direction, going in that certain direction often requires faith. But we also, in our planning, we put some plans together. We ask that the Lord bless it or give us insight into those plans. And then we move forward after we've counted the cost and tried to think through things. It's the same way with international management and international business. We've got to think through things and count the cost. Is this something that we should do? Is this worth our time doing it? And so there's a lot that goes into international management. Chapter 1 gives us a broad overview. So if we look at what is international business or international management, well, international business is business whose activities are carried out across national borders. This definition includes not only international trade and foreign manufacturing, but also the growing service industry in areas such as transportation, tourism, advertising, construction, retailing, wholesaling, and mass communication. So obviously that encompasses a lot. And we end up on this topic of foreign business. Foreign business denotes the operations of a company outside its home or domestic market. Many refer to this as business conducted within a foreign country. This term sometimes is used interchangeable with international business. So the idea is that if you are an American company and you're doing foreign business, then what that denotes is that you have an operation that's outside of your home country. You're not necessarily manufacturing everything in the U.S. and not necessarily manufacturing everything, abroad as well. But if you're doing business in India, there is an understanding that you are operating. You may be an American firm, but you're operating in a foreign country like India. So real quick to get some more terminology out, multi-domestic company. This is an organization with multi-country affiliates, each of which formulates its own business strategy based on perceived market differences. So multi-domestic, when we talk about multi-domestic, it's looking at different markets, and you may have different strategies for being in those markets. So going on, global company is an organization that attempts to standardize and integrate operations worldwide in most or all functional areas. So these are very large companies. Companies that we could think of would be like certain cell phone manufacturers. General Electric here in the U.S., it's a global company in that it has different operations in different countries, but what they're striving to do is to operate very similarly to their American offices. So we're trying to integrate operations worldwide and conduct them uniformly. And then international company is a global or multi-domestic company. Okay. There's three types of business environments: domestic, foreign, and international. Again, domestic is here in the United States. Foreign is an operation in another country, and international means that you're conducting business in multiple countries, and you are trying to operate all of those countries operate all of those businesses very similarly. So, what is an environment? When we talk about the business environment, what this entails is all the forces surrounding and influencing the life and development of the firm. So, let's focus on the term forces. Some of you may be familiar with Michael Porter's 5 Forces. If you aren't familiar, it wouldn't hurt to go and look at some of his. There's some YouTube videos from the Harvard Business Review where he talks about his 5 forces. But Michael Porter has done a great deal of research and work on forces that affect an environment. So there's 2 types of forces: external forces and internal forces. External forces, typically termed as uncontrollable forces. And what this means is that management has no direct control over what happens outside of the company. So, a great example, or, maybe we can't get great, but let's settle for good. A good example would be you are a company that sells a product, and there's suddenly a downturn in the economy. We go into a recession. Well, you as a company could not control whether or not a recession was going to happen. You unfortunately we'll use the word victim, you are a victim of the environment, in that you couldn't control whether a recession was going to happen in the United States or not. So when a recession happens, that may mean that people are not going to buy as much of your product. There are very few recession-proof companies out there. Grocery stores, to some degree, tend to be recession-proof. But to use an example, let's think of a soda manufacturer like Coca-Cola or Pepsi. So if there is a downturn in the economy, it's recessionary, one thing that people stop spending money on is soda. People just stop spending money on sodas. So companies like Coca-Cola and Pepsi will actually see profits on their soda decline during recessionary periods because people are being careful with what they are spending their money on. Next one is internal forces, and typically termed as controllable forces. And this is where management has opportunities to influence systems and culture within the organization. This is where a company says, well, we're going to have these management strategies, processes, and procedures in our organization, and they can control a lot of stuff. Management tends to be able to control, to some degree, if people are happy in the workplace or not happy, depending on the management style. Again, internal forces is something that people can control, or that companies can control. So, if we want to make sure I didn't skip any slides, if we want to look at uncontrollable forces, these are competitive, distributive, economic, socioeconomic, financial, legal, physical, political, sociocultural, labor, and technological. Again, you can't control these. These things happen in the outside world. So one thing that I've said is that you're living in a very interesting time where with a rise of nationalism in the United States. I'm not saying it's a good thing or a bad thing. We're simply observing it. And if you remember when Donald Trump was elected president, there were several dignitaries from other countries who flew in to the U.S. to meet with Donald Trump to make sure that he wasn't going to hurt the existing trade agreements. Japan has no control over who the United States elects as their president. Now, I realize there's some jokes we could make right now about, well, maybe Russia can influence who we elect as president, but that's neither here nor there. For the majority of examples and instances, countries can't control who is elected in another country. So when Donald Trump was elected, because he has a strong nationalist nationalist agenda, and he wants to make trade fair and equal compared to previous trade agreements, other countries were concerned about their economies because of how the new American economy might work. So competitive. These are kinds and numbers of competitors, their locations, and their activities. You can't control who's going to compete against you. You can't control who's going to start a company that sells a similar product as yours and charge less. You can't control new entrants to the market. Distributive. So this is national and international agencies available for distributing goods and services. These are national and international agencies available for distributing goods and services. Economic. Variables that influence a firm's ability to do business. Things that we might look at are gross national product, unit labor cost, and personal consumption expenditure. What are countries spending on certain products? Does that country, are there people able to have the levels of income necessary to purchase the product that we're selling? Again, cell phones. We used this example last week, but in India, an $800 iPhone is probably not on the agenda, but a cheaper, less expensive Nokia that doesn't have nearly the range of functionality as an iPhone, those will be something that can be purchased in a third world country that lives on about $1 to $2 a day. Socioeconomic characteristics and distribution of the human population. What types of ethnicities and races and cultures live in the place that we want to do business? If you are a meat packaging company, you're probably not going to do great, or if you're a meat provider, you're not going to do great in Hindu and some Buddhist communities. Because those communities don't eat meat. So your sales probably won't be as high as you would hope for them to be. Financial. Variables such as interest rates, inflation rates, and taxation. Those can affect the buying power of some consumers. You look at a country like Sweden, and they're heavily taxed, which means that I believe the majority of people in Sweden, they don't own their own homes. A lot of people rent, or the majority of people rent. Many people don't own cars because they can't afford to purchase cars. So you see a lot more people taking things like taxis, bicycles, public transport. So how a community or area is taxed is important. Also, as a company building a company somewhere, that plays the taxation, interest rates, things like that with banks, that can play a pivotal role. Also, if you look at tax breaks, there's a very large company in Broken Arrow. They may or may not sell, fishing supplies and hunting supplies. But one reason that they chose Broken Arrow was because the city gave them tax breaks up to 15 years. And it made it well worth it for them to open up a shop in Broken Arrow. Legal, the many foreign and domestic laws governing how international firms must operate. One example, and I think I gave this example last week, is the Philippines. In the Philippines, let's use the example of India. In India, if I started a company in India, I can't own the company outright. I actually have to have an Indian national, and when we say national, we mean a citizen of that country. So an Indian citizen has to own half of the company. And these can create definitely anxieties and stressors for doing business in a foreign country if you're having to share half of your business with a foreigner or a national. Physical elements of nature such as topography, climate, and natural resources. We'll get more into that in a subsequent lecture. Political elements of nations, political climate such as nationalism, forms of government, and international organizations. We've talked a lot about this. Sociocultural elements of culture important to international managers, attitudes, beliefs, opinions. We've alluded to that. Labor, composition, skills, and attitudes of labor. Not all labor is created equal. Some labor needs more technical expertise. So a great example would be it doesn't cost that much to train somebody how to operate a shovel. So if we use the example here in America, there's lots of people that can use a shovel because it doesn't take a lot of training to do that. Are there as many brain surgeons in America as people that can work a shovel? No, because it takes 10, 15, some may even say 30 years of training to be able to be a brain surgeon. So we have to look at, is our labor capable? One thing that we're watching in the news right now has been unfolding in the last few months, but Apple is putting more resources to reducing their factories overseas for the iPhone and opening up factories here in the U.S. for people to make iPhones. So there's lots of debate about that. We're seeing that from the Donald Trump presidency, that pressure, but could be a good thing. Could be a good thing for a lot of American citizens. The technical skills and equipment that affect how resources are converted to products. Do countries and labor areas, do they have the technological ability to develop some materials? Controllable forces. So let's look at controllable forces. Management does have some control over these forces, as we've said before. Such areas of control are factors of production, activity, and activities of the organization. So how much are we going to produce of products? And then activities of how will we do that? How will we achieve our end product goal? What all has to go into this in order to get a completed product? Now, the domestic environment. All the uncontrollable forces originating in the home country that influence the life and development of the firm. Domestic forces are the most familiar for managers. And so what this means is we're looking in we're looking through the lens of global business and international management. And when you live in the US, you understand how the US market works. But if you're trying to operate and control an office in India from the US, there's going to be challenges because you don't know what's going on every day in India as a country and India as your office environment. So you can potentially have a lot of challenges. Give me just a second. I'm going to cough. Okay, forces in the foreign environment are the same as those in the domestic environment, except that the forces occur outside of the domestic market. We've alluded to this. So forces can be similar, but not exactly the same. So forces have different value. Interesting story, Cuba and American-made school buses. So there was a firm that made school buses. It was an American firm, but they had basically international reach because they had a few countries in South America that they helped manufacture school buses. Well, there was one country that bought some of its parts from Cuba. Now, as of a few years ago, before certain embargoes were lifted on Cuba, and actually even until today, but the American firm, if they were building that school bus here in the U.S., they could not directly export, or I'm sorry, they couldn't directly import school bus parts from Cuba. However, their Argentinian office could get parts from Cuba and manufacture their buses there and send them to the U.S. So there's these, you have laws, you have embargoes, you've got kind of weird and funny things that kind of work with and against. And so it's just interesting what some of the loopholes can be working in international business and management. Obviously, forces can be difficult to assess. So you got political and legal forces. Example, starting a business in India that we alluded to. And you also have forces that you don't anticipate. So I believe it's World Compassion. They were barred recently from feeding starving children in India. There is a Hindu nationalistic movement in India, and they have put pressure on Modi, who's the Prime Minister of India, and they want all the Christian organizations out. And so this forced an organization like World Compassion that feeds starving children to pull their operations out of India, which is very sad. So forces are interrelated. So using things like low labor rates, both here in the U.S. and abroad, just pulling my thoughts together on this one. So you can use low labor rates in other countries. You can bring those products into the U.S. and have them finished off. And then moving on to the example of physical and sociocultural forces, you look at something like Nicaraguan coffee. There are certain attitudes about how you get coffee, how it works, and how the physical environment and those cultural forces work together have profound effects on how you resource properties from other countries, and we'll go into this a little bit more with some upcoming chapters and slides. So we have the international environment, and this is the interaction between domestic and foreign environmental forces. So now you don't just have domestic forces working on, you've got foreign and domestic working on the organization, or between sets of foreign environmental forces. So what all of this eventually does is can lead to complex decision making. So if we look back at international environment, you've got foreign and domestic forces working upon the company. And so you may end up with a manager in the U.S. who has to consider 10 offices. And maybe those 10 offices are located in 10 different countries. And they each have 10 different forces to contend with, totaling 100 forces altogether. That's going to stress you out as an international manager and business person, entrepreneur. There's a lot that you have to consider. So think of World Compassion. They're dealing with forces here in the U.S. of raising money in order to feed children in India, but now they're dealing with the foreign forces of a country that's outlawing your presence in the country. There's a lot to think about. What sometimes ends up happening is what's called self-reference criterion. And this is unconscious reference to one's own cultural values when judging behaviors of others in a new and different environment. So there's a Colombian gentleman I managed in one of my previous work experiences. Fantastic guy. I had more of an aggressive attitude with how we needed to do some things in the office. And I would go to him and I'd say, hey, when we're in our next staff meeting, I really need you to call out this challenge that we're having between the offices, because I really need your help supporting this initiative. When we get into staff meeting, he wouldn't say anything. It took me forever to understand why he didn't want to be aggressive like me, and I was judging his behavior based on where I was judging his behavior based on my American style of managing. But for his style of managing, what he really was seeking out was harmony. He wanted harmony in the office. So calling something out could hurt the harmony. And so when I was judging these behaviors, I had to take these things into consideration, that he's not working against me. He's just working with what he thinks is best given his cultural values and the environment he came from. So if we're thinking about exporting and importing, just exporting is transportation of any domestic good or service to a destination outside a country or region. So if you're in the U.S. and you're exporting steel to China, that's what you're doing. You're gathering your steel here in the U.S., you're selling it, and then moving it to China. Importing is the opposite. You're buying something in China and you're importing it here into the U.S. Globalization, this has taken on a very negative connotation with far right, with the far right. And so globalization, economic globalization especially, is the tendency towards an international integration of goods, technology, information, labor, and capital, or the process of making this integration happen. So we're hearing a biting tone in people being labeled as globalists, and as if we're painting these people as bad people for wanting to have open trade and better trade and shared labor and all of these things. We're hearing this as a negative thing now in a lot of tone in far right circles, but it is true that globalization is good for business. So, you can form your own attitudes about that, but globalization has been good for business. There's 5 drivers of globalization: political, technological, market, cost, and competitive. The political, so in the news what we hear is things like NAFTA, North Atlantic Free Trade Agreement. North American Free Trade Agreement. And so this is Canada and Mexico and the United States. And typically we've had free trade. You haven't had to pay import tax or tariffs, things like that, between Canada, Mexico, and America. However, that's kind of coming to an end. That was one thing that Donald Trump definitely railed against, was America wasn't getting the best out of Canada and Mexico. And so maybe something that you saw recently, as of a week or two ago, is that the federal government has authorized an 8% import tax on Canadian lumber. And so that's going to be difficult. Again, that's a political force and an economic force that Canada can't control. It's an uncontrollable force, but it is what it is, and the idea is that's going to help people here in America sell more lumber. American companies sell more lumber as opposed to Canadian firms. TPP, the Trans-Pacific Partnership, that got tore up in the first 100 days of Trump's presidency, and not too many people were sad to see that go. And then there's the European Union, which has become very volatile in the last few years. So Greece went bankrupt. Germany has been considered to be a key country in maintaining the European Union. Great Britain, as of last summer, voted to leave. Maybe it was it was last summer, voted to leave. You may have heard the term Brexit, Brexit, and England. Great Britain were not monetary partners in the sense of they still had their own currency apart from the European Union, but they were huge uh, in the political and organizational aspects of the European Union. They have voted to leave. So it's been interesting watching that unplay as well. So two other aspects: progressive reduction of the barriers to trade and foreign investment, and the privatization of companies in former Soviet bloc countries. So politically, there's lots of things that can play out. Ideally, you would want to reduce barriers to trade and foreign investment in order to have a very capitalistic free market. And then you can look at other countries like in the Soviet bloc countries that are beginning to privatize countries. When the Soviet Union was the Soviet Union, people didn't start companies. People didn't own companies. The government owned everything. And it was very difficult to grow business in the Soviet Union, and it seemed like it worked for a while. Everybody was able to eat relatively. But people really need to go back and read the history books on why the Soviet Union didn't survive. And part of it was due to the political forces in the economy. And now countries are having a difficult time privatizing. It's a very new way of thinking for a lot of these countries. A friend in Romania once said it's going to be another 30 to 50 years to really work out all the communism that affected that country. Technological increased global demand through Europe and Asia. The advent of the internet and online shopping has changed a lot. If you wanted to manufacture something in China, you can go to Alibaba.com and you can start working with a firm to develop products that will be sold here in the U.S. So those barriers of entry have been greatly reduced due to technology. Rapid flow of information. We can know immediately what's going on in any foreign country at any moment just by somebody streaming video or texting, posting something on Facebook. It doesn't take days or weeks or months to get information anymore. And then there's internet video conferencing. I mean, we could almost think this is internet video conferencing, that I could do a live stream this afternoon, the video records, and then I pass it on to you all. Market. We talked about Nokia just a little bit, but sometimes what you have to do is you have to find a blue ocean. I don't know if you're familiar with this term, but the idea is that cell phone companies and manufacturers, they exist in a red ocean. There's so many competitors that it's hard to capture new consumers. So in the US, we would say that that people who want to buy cell phones, it's pretty saturated. Almost everybody has a cell phone. I would be shocked if you didn't have a cell phone. Even if you're on government subsidies, there's some type of subsidy that will allow you to pay for a cell phone, a gift to the federal government. So what do you do when you're in these saturated markets? You have to find unsaturated markets. And a company that did that was like Nokia and other suppliers like Vodafone. So Vodafone is in India. They're in a third world country. A lot of people didn't think about going to a third world country, but Vodafone and Nokia were able to get the cost down exponentially to allow people who lived on $2, $3 a day to be able to afford a cell phone. So it's amazing stuff. Sometimes you have to go out there and find new markets, and you have to be very out of the box and offer products in a different way to achieve that. Cost, economies of scale to reduce unit costs. Typically, the more that you can produce, the cheaper it is going to be. And then move production of products to countries with lower cost of production. So that's what we're seeing now. It's cheaper to manufacture in China. Actually, it's even cheaper to manufacture in the Philippines and Cambodia right now. Those are the hot spots for manufacturing. It's cheaper to manufacture over there than it is here in the U.S. And so that's a problem that we have with labor. And one of the ways that we've been able to get cheaper and cheaper goods is we bring them in from other countries that pay their people extremely less. to manufacture them. If you work in the Philippines, you earn $3 a day for about 10 hours of work. You can produce a lot of stuff in 10 hours and you'll end up paying pennies for it in that country, and then you import it here into the US. So there's 7 dimensions for globalizing a business. There's the product, the markets, the promotion, where value is added to the product, the competitive strategy, the use of non-home country personnel, and the extent of global ownership in the firm. So we'll talk more about these as we progress through our weeks. Competitive, and I have here listed examples of Samsung and Daewoo. So Samsung, we typically think of them as cell phone providers, but they also make refrigerators because they want to be competitive. They want to be competitive in all of their markets. Daewoo, if you're in Asia and even here in the US, Daewoo is typically manufacture cars, but they also manufacture televisions. So your competitive arena can be very mirrored. And so I don't need to ask you this question, but it will be something that we can definitely tackle at a later time. So just want to say, as my screen grows crazy, let's see, and I'm going to stop. So just want to say thank you so much for checking out this first chapter, and we'll put 2, 3, 4 more chapters up here for your perusal. And yeah.